So this is the iPhone X, a phone I've used probably longer than any other phone I've ever owned. I've found that no matter what phone I've used, I constantly come back to this thing as my daily driver. But released back in 2017, it is getting on a little bit now, so should you still buy this thing in 2021? Let's find out. First off, as always, we're going to be taking a look at the specs. The iPhone X is rocking an Apple A11 Bionic processor, 3GB of RAM, 64 or 256GB of internal storage, so while a little bit limited, if 64 gigs isn't enough for you, like it is for me, seriously, I always buy the lowest storage amount. I never find myself needing more. You do get the option for more storage, so you can have a bit more stuff on your phone. The iPhone X weighs in at 174 grams, which is actually pretty heavy for a phone. However, I've never had any problems with hand fatigue, so I really don't consider the weight to be an issue. Finally, it comes in two colors, either silver or space gray. I personally really like the way the space gray looks on the iPhone X, so that's what I got mine in, and I have this nice case on it. But again, it's nice that you have the option to get another color. As for the specs, that's pretty much it. Now, while on paper, this may look a little bit dated, especially with that 3GB of RAM, I found that generally iPhone specs really don't matter all that much. I found a lot of the performance is down to the operating system, so we're going to be talking about that in a bit, but for now, how's the build quality? The iPhone X still feels really premium to this day, with a glass and stainless steel build that just screams quality. And while you can pick this thing up on the used market for $300-ish today, this phone was $1,000 on release. In fact, it was one of the earliest phones to charge that much, so they kind of had to provide a $1,000 design. It feels nice and slick in your hand, and while glass will make this phone more breakable, I've dropped this thing countless times within my ownership, and I've never had an issue. Granted, a lot of the time this was in a case, which, I mean, I recommend anyway, seeing as this is a glass phone, but a good few of the drops have been done without the case, and this phone's done just fine. Also, despite the camera bump being a little bit dramatic, I've never had any issues with that either, which is nice. The iPhone X also features an IP67 water resistance rating, meaning it can survive in up to a meter of water for 30 minutes, which is a nice failsafe if you accidentally get your phone wet. Overall, both design and build quality on this phone are pretty stunning, and it definitely still holds up well in 2021. Up next, we have the screen. The iPhone X features a 5.8 inch, which I still personally think is the best screen size, 2436 by 1125 OLED display with a PPI of 458 and a peak brightness of 809 nits. It was, of course, the first of its kind with that now almost iconic notch design, and even today, I think it still holds up pretty well. As pixels on this screen are self-illuminating, you get deeper blacks, richer contrast, and overall a pretty amazing looking screen. The iPhone X also features the now standard True Tone display, which has been one of my favorite features of iPhone displays for a long time now, as it keeps your phone screen looking nice and balanced no matter what light you're in. In terms of secondary interaction, the iPhone X has 3D Touch, which I've said multiple times that on principle of how cool the technology is, I still think it's really awesome despite being dulled down with iOS updates. Overall, the screen is what made me fall in love with the iPhone X in the first place, so it's no surprise that I still really like it in 2021. Following this, we have the button layout. This was, of course, the first of the notched iPhones, bringing a new button layout with an isolated side lock button, separate volume up and down keys, and a mute switch. Now, as some of you may know, I wasn't initially crazy on this layout. I thought the lock button was kind of poorly mapped, turning off the phone was a chore, and taking accidental screenshots was pretty much an everyday occurrence for me. In my time using this phone though, I've got much more used to it, my hands have adjusted, and I no longer find myself having these issues. All the buttons are a nice size, they all feel nice and tactile, though not quite as tactile as the aluminium phones in my experience, but still very nice all the same. Speaking of the button layout, another big thing to change with the iPhone X was, of course, the unlock method. The iPhone X removed Touch ID and replaced it with Face ID as the primary unlocking method. While this technology has come a long way in the last few years with angles expanding and the whole process speeding up, I find the iPhone X to work pretty damn well in 2021. While you don't get those angles that you can get on an iPhone 11 or later, the unlock speed has been drastically improved with iOS updates, especially with iOS 13. 2017, to the point where it's very snappy, can recognize my face in all light levels, and needless to say, I am very satisfied with it in 2021. Okay, so up next we have the camera, and in this review, I wanted to try something a little bit different. Instead of just going around where I live and taking photos like I usually do, I thought it'd be fun to go somewhere new and really put this thing through its paces. The iPhone X features a dual camera system with one wide/standard angle and one telephoto angle, which, as I've mentioned before, is my preferred system. The main lens has an aperture of f1.8, whereas the telephoto lens has an aperture of f2.4. It also features a front-facing camera, obviously it does, with a resolution of 7 megapixels and an aperture of f2.2. But how does this translate into real-world performance? In terms of photography, I really like the iPhone X. I actually mentioned a while back that I entirely switched from taking casual photos with my professional camera to simply using my phone, purely because of this iPhone X. On both the standard and the telephoto lens, colors and dynamic range look good, and there is a nice amount of sharpness, which is always great. The 2x zoom is also incredibly helpful, as it can provide either a totally unique perspective or just a little bit of extra flexibility with the range. And, well, in a lot of cases, you probably would notice the difference putting this thing up against something newer. This still a pretty great camera system in 2021. The iPhone X also features portrait mode, which, while only working on the telephoto lens, still works pretty well in 2021. You get that nice full-frame look in a compact system, and while the edge detection isn't perfect, it is still a very nice feature to have. In terms of video, the iPhone X shoots 4K at up to 60 FPS, which I really like for some of that nice, smooth, semi-slow motion, and honestly, even in 2021, it still looks good. The iPhone X can also shoot slow motion at up to 240 FPS in 1080p, and while it certainly lacks some of the newer technologies like better dynamic range and some of that amazing stabilization we saw on the iPhone 12, I still certainly think the iPhone X's video abilities are probably good enough for most people in 2021. But what about the front-facing camera? In terms of photos, the iPhone X does take some pretty nice selfies. Again, portrait mode is available here, and while it lacks the night mode feature like we saw in the iPhone 12, for some casual selfies, it's still certainly good enough. The video side of things I found is a little bit dated. The front-facing camera only records 1080p at up to 30 FPS, and while again, this is a sign of the iPhone X's age, for some casual video, it does just fine. And hey, if you want quality, you can always just flip this thing around. Wow, it is getting super dark. I gotta wrap this thing up fast. Overall, while there are certainly some signs of age on the iPhone X's camera, I think for a lot of people, this thing is more than enough for 2021. I've never really found myself wanting more, maybe some of those better portrait mode controls like we saw introduced on the iPhone XS, but still, all things considered, I am very satisfied with the iPhone X's camera performance in 2021. After this, we have probably the most important aspect on any modern smartphone: the OS and app performance. Seeing as the iPhone X was released back in 2017, it's obvious that it has gone through a fair amount of software in its time. But does that make up for the old hardware? Well, in terms of scrolling through the OS, performing system functions, and opening up stock apps, the iPhone X still feels pretty phenomenal. While if you did put this thing next to an iPhone 12, you may see some differences, in my day-to-day life, I genuinely cannot tell the difference. Okay, so of course this is all well and good, but how about some more intensive tasks? Again, watching 4K videos on this thing, I haven't had any issues. I never find the iPhone X to be stuttering or lacking in any kind of performance here. I only ever find myself limited by my Wi-Fi, which is great. In terms of gaming, again, it's a similar story. While I mostly prefer playing casual games, I have tried to test several different things on this phone, and it's all been pretty great, despite only having 3GB of RAM. Again, if I were to put this thing up against an iPhone 12, I probably would notice a bit of a difference. But speaking as someone who barely ever does any intensive gaming on this thing, I never find myself wanting more. So yeah, that basically sums up the performance side of the iPhone X. What's more is it's gonna get a few more years of support. It's impossible to say at this point due to the iPhone 6s still being supported. So at this point, I'd probably estimate like 6 years. So this phone's still got a decent amount of life left in it. Okay, so quickly going back to the hardware, let's talk about the speakers. While they're not as loud or full sounding as anything iPhone 11 or later, I still find whenever I just want to chug some music on, if I'm in the shower or cooking, the iPhone 10 performs just fine. It does of course have that stereo technology introduced on the iPhone 7, which utilizes both the top and bottom speaker to make it sound a bit more full. It's nice and balanced on the iPhone 10, and overall, for casual listening, the speakers do just fine. And hey, for higher end listening, you can always just plug in some headphones. Finally, and appropriately last, we're going to be talking about the battery life. The iPhone 10 features a battery size of 2,716 milliamp hours, and this is a weird one, because this is going to be pretty dependent on your battery health. Mine is actually pretty good, so I can almost always get through a full day on a single charge, but I do often have to plug it in during the evening. I recommend that if you're buying this phone, chances are you're going to buy it used, you thoroughly check the battery health before you click that add to cart button, as battery life is really important. In fact, it was the bad battery life that made me move away from my previous iPhone 10. But as long as you get one with solid battery health and you don't plan to play games on it all day, I've actually found battery life to be pretty good. So to summarize, all things considered, this thing is still definitely a viable option in 2021. This phone will likely continue to be my daily driver for a long time, as I really don't see the need to upgrade. And while again, I've said this in my review a couple of times, while in certain areas I can see the difference side to side with a brand new phone like an iPhone 12, in my day-to-day life, it is honestly a pleasure to use this thing. So if you want a notched iPhone that doesn't break the bank, I'd highly recommend checking out the iPhone 10. Alright guys, so that's it for today. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Let me know, by the way, do you have an iPhone 10? Do you plan to buy an iPhone 10? Feel free to let me know in the comments. I always enjoy reading those. Once again, a huge thank you to all the people who help support this show over on Patreon. If you want to get bonus videos, awesome wallpapers, and much more, then feel free to check that out. As for now though, as always, thank you for watching. Remember to like the video if you want to see more content like this, then smash that subscribe button. I'm done for now, and I will see you guys in the next one.